So our questions I'm going to look at today. Next one is, can I practice, I should say, can I practice Taiji without fighting? There's a question. Can I practice Taiji without fighting? Well, the immediate answer is yes. Yeah, of course. I mean, out of every martial art that's developed out of Asia, I think arguably the one that has made the biggest step towards health development is probably Taiji, Tai Chuan. I think that it's become so well known as a health art for people's joints, relaxation, breathing exercise. I mean, there's so many, I mean, it's not even worth me listing just because the list is huge. There's so many health benefits to practice of Taiji that, of course, all of those are valid reasons to practice Taiji. If you extract the fighting from it completely, yeah, I think that's fine. I don't think anyone with any intelligence would ever say you have to practice fighting to practice Tai Chi. But saying that, there are certain sides of Tai Chi that can only be understood if they are pressure tested through martial arts. Actually, did a podcast recently where I talked about that called The Meaning of Gong Fu, that actually kind of talks about the nature of it. So you want a more detailed answer to that, maybe listen to that podcast, The Meaning of Gong Fu. But ultimately what I was saying on the podcast was that the fighting in Tai Chi is really a pressure, or within most Chinese martial arts, is a kind of pressure testing to see if you can sustain your principles, to sustain your quality of mind, to sustain your center while under pressure from another person. To me, that's ultimately the main rationale for it. So that if you're practicing something like Tai Chi and you're practicing for, say you're practicing for stillness of mind and good levels of focus, which is a good reason to practice Tai Chi, you know. And if you're practicing for this, and maybe you achieve that very, very well, and that carries across into the rest of your life, and then somebody stresses you out or cuts you up on the motorway or something bad happens, and instantly that center is lost, your emotions come out and you get angry, then ultimately, you know, your practice is not really serving you as well as it could. So what happens is you use combative training initially through push hands, which is not really fighting, it's a partner drill, and then through more pressurized training through sparring and things like that. And ultimately the other person represents the stressor that you're trying to maintain or sustain your qualities under when you're under this pressure. And if you do this and you pressure test those qualities, then what happens in the rest of your life is those qualities tend to get maintained while difficulties arise around you. And I think that's one of the greatest arguments for fighting's an odd word, isn't it? I mean, that's the word in the question, but because fighting implies, you know, you're in some kind of danger. But I think that's the main reason for partner work in something like Tai Chi as well these days, because that's what the arts have evolved towards. I think the days of Tai Chi being a bloodthirsty, bare-knuckle boxing art are well and truly gone. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I don't think the world needs more violence. I think it's a good evolution. But I think that's the reason for the partner work, the why, or the biggest usefulness of it for people. But do you need it for Tai Chi? No, not at all. You couldn't deny the massive health benefits people are having from practicing it. You do see a funny statement come up on the internet quite often, which I find quite funny, where people say you don't get the health benefits from Tai Chi if you don't practice the fighting. I've seen that written several times. That's really not true. That's so far from true, it's unbelievable. I mean, one of the biggest health benefits of Taiji is the fact that you sung and release, so that everything opens up on the inside of the body. You move very, very slowly, which tends to relax and release the nervous system while listening or absorbing the mind, a kind of mindfulness into your body while you're moving. I mean, all of that is going to de-stress the body massively, which takes all of the pressure off of the internals of the body, off of the organs. I mean, blood pressure, fight or flight, all of these things come into it. So there's huge amounts of health benefits to be had there, like life transforming for a lot of people. Certainly enough, I think, to prolong a lot of people's lives if they can switch from their state before into this state. And none of that had anything to do with fighting. So that whole, you need the fighting to get the health benefits of Tai Chi, I think that is either coming from people who haven't thought very hard, or I think it's coming from people that like fighting, that have a vested interest in other people and convincing them to do it. So no, I don't think so. I think that the beauty of the Taoist arts and the internal arts is that there's so much you can take out of them. So if one person wants to study something like Tai Chi in a competitive way, it's not my interest, but if they want to do that, that's cool. But if somebody wants to study Tai Chi purely for the sort of health in their joints and relaxation, that's cool as well, that's great. And I think that it's great that the art can't be pigeonholed into one of those areas, then that ultimately people can choose what they take from it. I think that's massively inclusive. And I think it's really strange when people try to pigeonhole Tai Chi or drag it back towards their interest to the detriment of others. And I think that that's as much a reflection on them as anything else. So can Tai Chi be practiced without fighting? Yes. Yeah, most certainly. As an art, it has evolved into a health art, and I think ultimately that's where it's going to stay. I think that's the sort of niche it's found itself within, and I'm not against that as an evolution. I think that's fine. Our next question then, how to choose a good teacher? Well, this is one of those things that almost everybody does at some stage that I never have, where they put out a video how to choose a teacher, or it used to be in books, didn't it? Like so many of the famous Tai Chi and Qigong teachers at some stage has either written an article or an appendix in one of their books, how to choose a teacher. And you can normally paraphrase what they've said into come train with me. That's essentially what it is. So it's basically they've listed off their own qualities and said this is a good teacher. So I mean, if I wanted to join that trend, what I might say is, yeah, how to find a good Qigong teacher? Well, they need to be English. Yeah, they need to be about 39 years old, male, born in Somerset, something like that. I mean, it's not far off what they're doing. I mean, my opinion of how to choose a good teacher, I think there's lots of ways to answer that. And I think that there is no one good teacher for everybody. I mean, I personally think I'm a very good teacher for some people. I think I'm a terrible teacher for other people. And I think that it really depends on who I am in comparison to the person I'm teaching. So for example, if I think about me, you know, I think I'm a very good teacher for people who are quite, well, I guess, fanatically interested, who really want to get to the bottom of things. I tend to be very good for them. But I'm not very good teacher maybe for casual students sometimes, who kind of want to come along and do it as a bit of a hobby. I think they probably find my level of input a little bit stressful or something like this. I'm also not a very good teacher for those people that are really, really purist into like one line. Because, okay, I do have a main lineage, but I've also cross-trained in various other things as well. So, I mean, you can see from that there's factors as to how someone be a good teacher for some people and a good for others. So I think the answer to how to find a good teacher is really understand what you want in the first place. So if you are going to a class, for example, and you're doing it, your local church hall class, because you want a little bit of a social output, you know, maybe you're feeling a bit lonely and you'd like to join a club and get to know people, then really, I mean, the best teacher is going to be the one that's friendly, available, creates a pleasant atmosphere to train in. I mean, that's that. Those qualities are going to be paramount to you and far more important to whether they're a master of the style. If you really want to be, you know, you really want to go deep, you're like, right, I want to do Tai Chi and I want to master Tai Chi, I want to get to the bottom of it. Well, that's quite simple. You need to find someone who can do what you want to be able to do. That's it. You need to look, do they have the skills that I am seeking to achieve? That would be the first step. The second step after that is, are some of the people who have trained with them a long time also able to do some of those things? Because if the teacher is very good but the students are not so good, then something is going wrong. Maybe not on the new students, of course, and maybe not all the students, because you know not everybody puts the same amount of effort in and things like that, but the seniors at least should be able to replicate some of what the teacher does. So that shows that the skills are being passed on. The third question with that one then is the teacher prepared to show you? Now, you shouldn't be prepared, the teacher shouldn't be prepared to show you from day one. You know, all of the deepest secrets, they should be prepared to show you the foundations. But do you get the feel that you could progress through the system and nothing would be held back? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then that's probably the right teacher for you. So there's other questions you should ask as well, like, are you somebody who struggles with people? Do you have social anxieties? A lot of people do in the internal arts, right? I mean, because a lot of people in the internal arts tend to be quite introspective, right, by the nature of being interested in internal arts. Otherwise, if you weren't very introspective, you'd probably be interested in external arts, external things. So a lot of people are very introspective, also have difficulty in crowds, maybe difficult with other people, or they find it stressful interacting. So if you have something like that, these need to take into consideration, because would you do okay as that person with a teacher that is very domineering, or very alpha, or a bit of a bully, or creates a very martial atmosphere in the class? Is that going to terrify you? So if you set foot into that class, you've got to ask yourself, is that going to enable you to tackle that discomfort, or is that situation going to be so stressful that it makes your personal social anxieties worse? In which case, that teacher would not be a good teacher for you. It'd be terrible. You're better off finding someone that's a little bit more caring and compassionate, and maybe interested in nourishing that side of what's going on. But if, on the other hand, you are not someone who suffers with those kind of anxieties, then that very outgoing, yang, extreme teacher is going to be fine for you. And actually, maybe that's the kind of environment you flourish in. And I've just picked those examples out of the air, but there's so many variables on who a good teacher is for you, because that's the answer. There's not good teachers and then bad teachers. There's good teachers for you, bad teachers for you, and you need to know what it is you're looking for and what it is you can cope with and what you can't cope with, and that's what you need to find. If you were looking like strictly on technicality, then you've got two questions there, which is, I mean, if you're looking like how to find a good teacher just on, are they technically good? That's always hard to know if you don't have any knowledge of the art in the first place. That's always tricky, because how do you know what you're looking at? Because sometimes what appears the most flashy is not necessarily correct or something. So you've got that whole lineage argument versus non-lineage. So a lineage, if you're not familiar, means that someone has a very direct sort of person-by-person relationship back to the source of the art. That's a good start point, because if someone you can trace back, to the origin, what they're doing, then that's a good start point for finding someone with good technique. But it's not the be-all and end-all, because I've met people with very good lineages who have very poor skill, very, very terrible. And that sounds strange, doesn't it? But sometimes what can happen with lineage is that, well, for a start, in Asia, you can buy your way in. So there's that. And sometimes what will happen is teachers will just choose their favorite as a person to become someone who's part of a lineage. And I think the other thing with it as well is you have to remember that sometimes style, especially style lineages, come from styles. And a style ultimately meant that somebody specialized in something. So with something like Taiji, right, maybe you had, or martial arts in general, if you had two people learn off the same teacher, okay, you had two students. This one was good at punching, this one was good at throwing, okay? The one who was good at punching developed a style based on punching. The one who was good at throwing developed a style based on throwing. They both learnt from the same person, but they emphasized different qualities. That's what tends to happen within a lineage, within the martial arts. So then what happens is somebody joins that lineage, and because it's the throwing lineage, whatever that might be, then that's what they do. They just study throwing. So it means they've had a very good connection to the source, but actually they were restricted by the style limitations of who they learnt from. And that can happen in martial arts. So sometimes, but not always, someone who is very strictly within a line can have a lot of limitations because they're restricted by a style. But at the same time, someone who jumps from place to place to place is more likely to be way worse than them because they've not had consistent training from one person. So it's very, very complicated. It's a very, very complicated question, So someone like myself, I am within a couple of, a few actually lineages lines that I'm, have a direct line from the source, but then I've also cross-trained in other areas to try to fill in the blanks in my knowledge base a little bit. But then not everybody wants that, because some people are seeking out lineage more than they're actually seeking out being good at the art, which I've always thought was really strange, but each to their own, So to answer that question is very, very difficult. With regards to Nei Gong, a lineage is actually more important generally, because the methods are quite exact. But with regards to Nei Gong, again, you want someone who is able to do what you want to do, and someone whose students are able to do what they're able to do as well, to what the teacher teaches, and someone who is able to pass on the knowledge base, as much as anything. I answered that in a complex fashion, didn't I? Basically, the answer is, it's not easy to know, because it's really going to vary from person to person. Maybe what the best thing to do is, with regards to finding a good teacher, is to write down all of the things in you. If you're looking for a class, maybe write a list, literally write a list. What are the things I want from the teacher? What are the things I would find difficult from the teacher? And then you probably find that once you finish that list, you already know what qualities you're looking for, and then you can go out and seek them, and you can make sure you find the best teacher for yourself. I would also say that sometimes the local teacher maybe is not necessarily going to be the best teacher for you, just on law of probability. You know, if like so happens the best teacher in the world was 20 minutes down the road in the local church hall on a Wednesday night, maybe, but statistically that's probably not the case. It's better to find out what qualities you want from the person and then go and find those qualities in yourself. The teacher-student relationship is a strange one because, especially within the internal arts, what you find is you'll often tend to take on qualities of the teacher, especially the longer you've been there. You won't become a carbon copy and a little mini-me's, but there's a rubbing off of qualities of, you know, you can even see sometimes like the belief system of the teacher going into the students, even their political standpoints and their social interactions and the way they are with people and these little mannerisms is very influential because you're spending all your time watching someone trying to copy what they do, and you might just be copying the form, but what you don't realize is subliminally also picking up a lot of how they act and how they perceive things and who they are. So they will transform you, they will change you. Like, it's almost unavoidable. There's so many of my characteristics were changed by my teachers, whether I wanted to or not, just because of the teacher-student relationship. So the other thing to be aware of is when ascertaining whether that person is a good teacher for you. They don't have to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination, because who is? But do they have qualities that either A, you want, or B, you would be prepared to allow to transfer into you? And if you don't like that teacher and they have qualities that you don't like and you think, I really don't want to pick those habits up, then beware, because you'll be surprised how many attributes of your teacher you subconsciously pick up, whether you want to or not. Human beings are very adaptable and very influenceable. So, how to choose a good teacher? My answer would be based on that, rather than, you know, amount of years trained and because all of those are just really obvious. You don't want someone who's trained for a few years. I personally wouldn't seek out a teacher who has done anywhere less than 2 decades to a decade of practice. I would find that, you know, for anything beyond the foundations, but all those things are obvious. So that's how I would say how to find a good teacher. Should be not how to find a good teacher, should be how to find a good teacher for you, I think. Our next question is definitely related to Qigong more than anything else, and it's how do I gather extra Qi? Okay, how to gather extra Qi? Well, I mean, we're assuming we're building more energy in the body. I mean, there's a simple answer and there's a long answer. I mean, most of the methodologies involved in Qigong, or certainly Nei Gong, are about this on some level. But I would say maybe the thing we need to understand then is about location of Qi. How to gather extra Qi. First thing is to understand is you will not gather extra Qi from the environment. That's probably one of the most controversial things within Qigong that sometimes I say when I'm on courses, and I got a lot of new people, sometimes they get upset actually, which I think is a bit strange. To hear a view they don't agree with, they get upset, but often they'll disagree, and that's okay. So what I've seen is lots of people trying to gather Qi from trees or planets or constellations or the environment, all sorts of things, you know. Animals, do people do that? I'm not sure, but you know, trying to gather Qi, chasing a squirrel, trying to suck the Qi out of it. People try and gather Qi from the environment. You can't do that, actually. If you can, it's minimal, like it's a tiny little bit, you know, like a little bit. You can think more about environmental work as being like tuning forks. So there is, environmental work does have a place in Qigong. There's definitely work with trees, Ping Heng Gong. There is work with the environment, with the stars and things, but it's like tuning forks. It's like those things resonate on one level, and when I connect with them, bing, they line up, and then you start to resonate on the inside on the same level. So they're more like cleaning than anything else when you use the environment, but they don't give you extra. Sometimes they feel like they give you extra, because if you're vibrating, if you want to use these hippie-ish terms, on a negative frequency, and your health will suffer. And as soon as I sync up with that thing, that natural body, that tree, that whatever it is I'm working with, then I will be healthier. Like it's like a cleaning. So what happens when you're cleaner is it feels like you've got more energy, you've got more vitality. So I feel like that, but it's not that you've drawn more energy from that object. It's just from like tuning forks having an influence upon you. So there are exceptions. There's exceptions. There are certain points, energy nodes on the body and stuff that people use in practice, but still they're minor. Like at most they can be as useful as supplements are to a bodybuilder or something like that. You know, not you know, I'm not talking steroids or something, but like vitamins or proteins. They're not the be all and end all. Most of the chi you gather comes from within you, and that's what's most important. So for a beginner, a lot of the chi comes from the food, and the more they practice their arts, the more efficiently their body extracts that energy from it. But after a while, a lot of the energy is produced within your body. So the more efficiently your body functions, the more your body will produce chi inside. It gets produced in the cells, it gets produced in the dantian. Once that's developed, it gets produced from the chemicals within your body as well. But the more you practice, the more you breathe, the more you condition the mind, the more you condition the body, the more efficient the body functions, so the more it starts to produce that energy. So your body is the factory for the energy that you produce. So what happens is your body produces the energy, and then that energy is harvested and taken down and stored within the dantian, within Nei Gong practice, or used for other things within different arts. But you are the source of your chi, of the majority of your chi. And sometimes people I've taught haven't liked that, but after they train me a while, I've shown them and they've seen the sense of it, that actually that's what takes place. That chi that is built in you, the energy that is produced within the factory of your body, is then what is refined for alchemy or circulated for qigong or something like this. And that energy you produce is always going to be more beneficial than anything you might get from anywhere else. There is then a couple of exceptions. So you can get chi that is passed from one person to another if someone is able to fa chi, to issue chi, and that's possible. And a teacher, normally they have to be very, very experienced, will assist you by passing their energy from their body into yours. But that's a little bit of a different thing. That's not so common. And obviously you could list other things like herbs, Chinese herbs, but I put that under food really. And there's sort of alchemical herbal formulas that will help, but still none of those are going to be as good as the energy that you produce within your own body. Sometimes people need to make that distinction sometimes with how Qigong or Nei Gong practice works, is they think that you do the exercises to produce Qi. It's true, but it's not true. You do the exercises so that your body functions more efficiently, so that your body then produces more Qi. That's really what's happening, and that's why we have so many of these exercises to change the breathing, change the mind, change the body, because the more efficiently you function, the more vitality, the more energy that you will have. And then the dantian, ultimately, especially the lower dantian, amongst other things, is the place where that extra gathered energy is then stored. That's the battery, the rechargeable battery that we put that extra juice into. So that's where we gather the majority of our qi from in Qigong practice. So our next question then. This is also one of the most common questions I'm asked, normally by young males when they join the school. I'm asked it in various forms. That's sometimes a little bit less direct than this, but should I give up sex for Daoism, is this question, or the Taoist practice. Should I give up sex for Daoism? Now obviously what happens is whenever you read any Qigong book or alchemy book or Chinese medicine book actually, what they'll talk about is your jing, your essence, and how, especially for males, women too, but mostly for males, it gets burned up from sexual activity, from ejaculation and orgasm. So what normally happens is people come into Qigong and they think, oh, I want my essence, I want it to last, so should I become celibate, or should I restrict what I'm doing? Or often what happens is kind of paranoia or fear arises around sex. I can see why these paranoias would arise, because it sounds quite terrifying that these things arise. But as much as anything, no, you shouldn't give up sex for Taoism. It's a natural part of life. Rather, moderation is what they advise within the arts, and there's very clear teachings on how much people should have sex as well. What is too much, especially for males again. And you can find these if you go look them up. But you have to remember that those guidelines are produced often for people that are suffering from negative symptoms of too much sexual activity, and also for cultivation practitioners, because there is a certain level of essence that is built. So during alchemical practice, there are certain times when you should become celibate for short periods prior to engaging in certain practices. And it's just so a particular type of energy within the body settles and starts to consolidate a little bit. It just needs a bit of time. And every time you have sex, it just disturbs it and moves it away from that center. So there's a certain degree of allowing it to consolidate and move to a center that's needed for certain parts of the alchemical process. But that's not all of the time. And I think especially for younger people, I've known some people that get overly paranoid about it, and they try to store up the jing, and they become almost like little monks, you know, and often they miss out on a large part of their life, and then they go through especially they get involved very young, and they get into their 20s, and they start developing through these arts and getting into this practice, and they turn around one day in their 30s and they realize that they've wasted a whole aspect of their life. So no, you shouldn't become celibate for these arts, definitely not, unless you decide to become a monk. That's a very different thing. But if you're going to become a monk, you have to do it properly and go off to live. You can't just decide to be a monk and still live in your little, you know, one-bedroom apartment and pop to Tesco's to get food twice a week or something. If you're going to be a monk, you have to go live in a monastery, which normally means going to Asia. Yeah. So rather like the thing to understand with Jing and sexuality and Daoism, that's what's more important is, do you have a healthy relationship to it? So the Jing, your essence at the base of your body, has a connection to your drives and your desires, sexuality being a large part of this. And I think that rather than looking at abstinence from sex, rather people need to look at the health of their connection to it, so that their sexuality is a natural expression of their connection to a loved one or a partner, rather than just a sort of a desire that needs to be fulfilled. And a lot of people have a lot of hang-ups and distortions and deviances attached to this part of their energy center as well. And it's more important for those things to be cleaned and purified, not through judgment or anything like that, but just through understanding what is not pure and through cultivation practices to settle it, rather than abstinence itself. I think that's a lot healthier. You actually have there's certain conditions that can arise in the body if there's a lot of sexual deviance within the mind, which normally arises from overwatching of pornography or something like this, or unhealthy experiences at a young age. And what happens is that Jing starts to distort the qi within the body. So there's bigger problems there. So I often would say to someone who was worried about such things, don't worry about the abstinence. Moderation is fine, especially if your health is a little bit lower, you lack a bit of essence. But more important than giving up sex is understanding what is your relationship to it, how is it used? Is it morally and ethically correct what you're doing? Is there a purity to it, and is it being used as a form of connection to someone rather than something that is deviant or something like that? That's a bigger issue to me, because the more healthy your relationship to that part of your nature, the more settled the Jing will become. But that becomes difficult in modern culture, where we live in a time where anything goes, and they have this view of like everything is okay. And actually, according to classical values, that wouldn't be the case. But that's a huge, huge subject that's almost like a massive can of worms when you open it. So I'll try to keep it vague. And it's all very individual anyway. But yeah, look at your relationship to your sexuality rather than trying to completely switch yourself off from it. Ultimately, Jing is there to be used. That's what makes life interesting in some ways. But Jing must be related to in a healthy fashion, used in moderation. So, that being said, used to have Jing deficiency, essence deficiency, you associate often with older people, within these arts. But increasingly, finding within Chinese medicine and Qigong circles, younger people coming in with Jing deficiency these days, people in their 20s, people in their teens, whose essence is already kind of knackered. And a lot of them have been knackered by over sexual stimulation or over sexual use, partially because of media imagery and the connection to masturbation and things like that. So moderation to a healthy level is very wise. I think what should happen is, if you want to understand it, then probably go away and look up the nature of kidney deficiency and essence deficiency for a Chinese medicine perspective. You can find this through a Google search very quickly. Look to the signs and symptoms that arise when the kidneys or the essence is drained, and use that to help you understand if you are engaging in too much sexual activity. That's probably the most useful way to look at it. And if you are, those signs are arising, then try moderating or limiting your sexual activity for a time to see if those signs and symptoms improve. And if they do, you've got a very easy sign that you are engaging in too much sexual activity. And that's important for someone who engages in the practice. But complete abstinence, no, that's not needed. As a footnote, I should also add that there are lots of practices where people try to separate ejaculation from orgasm in Daoism. Partially this comes out from very populist jewel cultivation sort of sex practice books. So what happens is people are about to have sex and then about to orgasm, and what they do is they normally press the perineum really hard, which basically restricts the sexual fluids in coming out, and then they try to re-establish it and draw it into the body. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's a bit of a misunderstanding. Actually, it is orgasm, not ejaculation, that burns up the jing, because people think the jing is just like this fluid, and once the fluid is gone, then that's what the problem is. And yeah, that's true, like semen contains some of the jing, but actually the act of orgasm, when it burns through the nervous system and sends that energy through the body, it's already disturbing the essence. So often what happens is people will try to engage in these practices and then lock the perineum so that there's no ejaculation, or learn ejaculationless orgasms. They're still burning up the jing. And on top of that, what happens, often they're attaching a kind of mental tension to the act of sex as well, which creates a kind of frustration or deviance, which actually starts to distort the heart and lead to a condition called poison fire influence in the heart, or poison fire invades the heart, I think is the name. Which essentially means that sort of sexual frustration and deviation starts to distort their relationship to others. So it can mess up your ability to have a healthy relationship with another person anyway. So beware of those sexual practices. It's better to understand moderation to a healthy level and healthy connection to sexuality, because ultimately that's going to take care of that side of your training. Better than pressing your perineum in a highly romantic fashion at just the right moment.